Hi everyone, Dr. Lewis here. So this is just a quick introduction to Anna Akhmatova and then also reading her poetry, which you will have an actual activity to do by Friday. So, Anna Akhmatova, who I kind of introduced in the last lecture, she is related to Russian nobility and reaches rock star status in Russia through her poetry. She lives and writes through the Russian Revolution in 1917, the Bolsheviks, and Stalin from the mid 20s to 1953. Her most famous poetry is actually written during the Stalinist terror, which there's various labels that we give that: the Great Purge, the Great Terror, which is a political purge that happens in 1936 to 1938. In 1921, her ex husband is executed for supposed conspiracy charges. Her son is imprisoned multiple times. She writes pro Stalin poems in an attempt to gain his freedom despite loathing Stalin. Her house is bugged, and there is an execution warrant for her at one point that is never signed. Like, they find the blank warrant on Stalin's desk, essentially, but he never signs it. And it isn't until after World War II that she's able to live comfortably again. So she is basically as famous as a poet can be in Russia, and has a lot of, basically lives through all of the major revolutions and political strife that occurs there. So, Russia deems her work dangerous and as having no social value. They said that it promoted too much individuality. So, there's a general suppression of the arts in Russia at this time. I guess probably more accurately, we're getting into Soviet Union, but there's a general suppression of the arts where certain art is promoted as good and acceptable, while other art is deemed dangerous or trash. So we're going to think about that idea, like what happens in times of cultural and political upheaval, and how art is kind of a reflection of what's happening in that greater controversy. For right now, I want to introduce you to some of Anna Akhmatova's poetry. So you do have an activity on Friday where you will be expected to analyze one of her poems from Requiem. So this is just an example of kind of how to walk through her poetry. So he loved. He loved three things in life: evensong, white peacocks, and old maps of America. He hated it when children cried. He hated tea with raspberry jam and female hysteria. And I was his wife. Okay, so sometimes when I read this poem to people, the initial gut reaction is that she really doesn't like her old husband, her ex-husband. So, and it is, if we think about this as a memorial poem or an obituary, um, it is a little bit odd that she's bringing up kind of these random details, and some of them kind of make him seem, some of them are kind of like not entirely positive. Like, he hates female hysteria, he hates when children cry. So it is a little bit of a strange dynamic to set up between a husband and a wife, even an ex-husband. So, but I want you to think about this further in terms of, how do you remember the people that you have lost? And again, I'm sorry to bring up possibly negative subject matters, but if you think about the people that you love most in life, what do you remember about them, or what do you know about them that other people don't? Like, what are the things that you know very intimately about them? And if you think about a regular obituary, it'll say your children's names, basically matters of public record, what you did for work, when you died, the date. It doesn't always capture kind of these little personal things. So who would know that he has this nerdy habit of liking old maps of America? Or that he really likes evensong, which is basically hymns. So that's a type of hymn. That he doesn't like the raspberry jam with his tea. He likes this other type of tea. Even if you read the children line to mean not so much that it annoys him, but he doesn't like it when he hears his own children cry. So I think that it is a strange little poem, and I think that you can think of it in terms of how intimate it is, rather than how like she's not just screaming his praises. But there is an intimacy here that you don't have with everybody. Okay, so moving on to the next one. Wild honey has the scent of freedom, dust of a ray of sun, a girl's mouth of a violet, and gold has no perfume. Watery the mignonette, and like an apple, love, but we have found out forever that blood smells only of blood. Okay, so breaking this apart, to a certain extent, sometimes I get the comment that it's just kind of a random array of items. But breaking it apart a little bit more, I do think that this poem is very much about creating or even being a poet. So if we think about wild honey has the scent of freedom. So thinking about that in terms of poetic language, of a metaphor, of getting into that figurative language, that part of what poets and artists do is they take something and they transform it for you, or they point out qualities of it that you haven't thought of before. You could even go back into transcendentalism for this. What is grass? It's not just a piece of vegetation. It can be a flag. It can be a handkerchief. It can be a grave. It can be all of these things. So wild honey has the scent of freedom, dust of a ray of sun. And with that one, I kind of think about dust. Have you ever had dust in a room where, like, it's kind of dusty, but then the sun is shining on it and it's actually kind of pretty? Like, I kind of get that visual. A girl's mouth of a violet. So, comparing a girl's mouth to a flower and what that implies, what that brings to your mind. That gold has no perfume. Watery, the mignonette, which is a type of sauce, and like an apple, love. So all of these comparisons that are kind of playing with pretty images and pretty words, and it's very kind of aesthetic. It's very kind of pretty. But then we have these last two lines where there's a turn, and it says, "But we have found out forever that blood only smells of blood." Why does blood only smell of blood? Why can't blood be transformed? And I think that there's a couple of different ways to approach that. And I think that partially you can approach that as she is someone who has actually experienced blood, that she has experienced people close to her dying, that if you've actually experienced something traumatic like that, she can't be a poet for you right now. She can't transform something for you. She can't make it pretty or nice. That she can't change blood. Blood is just blood. That it's kind of, you can't make that into a pretty image. It's just what it is. So I think that that's one way to look at it. Okay, so normally we would analyze these as a class and kind of walk through it very slowly. So I've tried to do that for you, and I hope that this helps kind of think about how to talk about Anna Akhmatova's poetry that you'll be reading on your own. I did have one last concept that I want to go over though. So, what is the purpose of this set of poems? So, I've given you to read Requiem, which is a set of poems, and it has a purpose of memorializing the events happening in her country, including remembering the dead and capturing the helplessness and pain of this historic moment. So she's trying to capture and remember what happened, and that includes the emotions of what happened, the pain of what happened, the dead that we don't even have a list to say all of their names. We don't even know all of their names. That's the purpose of these set of poems. And I want to think about, why do we memorialize those who were lost and those who were loved? This is something that humans do in a variety of ways for a variety of reasons, from art to gravestones to memorial statues to moments of silence. So, one poem that I wanted to give you to kind of work as a companion piece is Billy Collins' Names, which is a poem that was written a year after 9/11. So I've given you the link here, and you can pause the video and open the link and watch it, or you can watch this video at another time, maybe after the lecture. I'm not going to pause the video and play it for you, but just at some point pull it up. It's very short, only about 3 to 4 minutes long. What I want you to get from Autumn Akhmatova and also Billy Collins, and here's a picture of the 9/11 memorial, which I went to. I visited New York City immediately after 9/11, basically, and then later, about 10 years later, when the memorial was completed. And it is a very um, intense experience to just go there and see it. They have all of the names um, etched into stone around it, and it's just kind of it's a very powerful memorial. And the reason why I bring this up with Billy Collins, with the 9/11 memorial, but also with Anna Akhmatova, is I want to think about, what does art capture for us? Why do we create monuments to loss and pain? What do these monuments, in the form of poems or a memorial statue or anything else, capture that a history book cannot? What is the importance of not forgetting these historic moments? And what is art and culture's significance in our lives? So these are concepts that I want to continue thinking about, that I want to explore with these texts. Okay, so I hope that this helps you analyze the poetry on Friday. Yeah, and let me know if you have any questions.